So, well, good afternoon, all. Thank you for taking the time to attend this event. I would like to thank Courtney and the CMGT program for putting together this event and provide me with the opportunity to learn from you current students. As I know that I graduated a bit over 10 years ago in 2010. That was coming out of the Great Recession, and those were tough times to find a job and an internship. I certainly hope things are easier for everyone nowadays. I was telling planning students a few weeks ago in a similar panel that it's really important to work with your career advisors when looking for internships and jobs. That certainly helped me when I was a student, and I do not remember the number of mock interviews I did with Ms. Ruska, even when I was a grad school student, to prep me for all these interviews. I also know that the commitment to student success is unwavering, and students are lucky, as I was, to have such a committed staff, in addition to the faculty body led by Peter. So today we'll be discussing housing development, specifically financing, and how, as a developer or contractor, you can leverage these government funds that are available for you to build housing. Some of you will be working as a PM for a contractor. Know that many of the contracting companies also have a development branch, and you can decide to be a development project manager if your interest is in financing. I will start by defining a couple of basic terms that I will be using through this presentation so that we are all on the same page, and feel free to interrupt if you have any questions or need clarification. So the first one, AMI. What's AMI? You probably heard of it. It's area median income. It represents the median income for households in a metro statistical area, also known as MSA. AMIs are calculated yearly by HUD, which is the Housing and Urban Development Department, and are based on the household size. The AMI in the Twin City area would be different from the AMI in New York or Los Angeles or Houston. For example, in 2020, the AMI for the Minneapolis-St. Paul area was $103,400 for a family of 4. So affordability, this is a very important concept when talking about government funding. It simply means that the household does not pay more than 30% of their income toward housing costs, including rent and utilities. If you pay more than 20%, it's no longer affordable, and it's called your cost burden. So we have a number of options when it comes to financing. When you apply government funding as a development project manager, not many, I wouldn't go much into details, but I'm just going to discuss the main restrictions here for each of one of these funding. As a development project manager, when you are doing your BOE, back of the envelope calculations, you need to understand the impact of government subsidies in your operations in terms of rent limitations, and make sure that your company has the capacity to follow up on compliance. I'm going to start with the CDBG. That's Community Development Block Grants, a federal government funding with the goal of providing affordable housing and infrastructure development. So here with CDBG, the minimum affordability requirement is 51% of the total units must be affordable to households at 80% or below AMI. If you are building a 100-unit building, then it means that 50 plus 151 unit must be affordable to people who do not make more than 80% AMI. assuming that like in 2019, the AMI was 100,000, 80% would be 80,000. So for a family of 4 making 80,000 or less, they should be able to live in this in one of the 51 units. Home, that's another federal funding that is granted to states and units of government, local government, to implement local housing strategies designed to increase home ownership and affordable housing opportunities for low income and very low income people. Here, the restriction is people, and it depends on the federal government sets the minimum requirements, like no more than, if you want to afford, buy one of these, let's say single family house that's subsidized, you should be at 80% AMI. Again, if assuming the AMI is $100,000 in the Twin Cities, roughly $103,000. So a family of 4 shouldn't be making more than $80,000 to be able to live in to buy one of these units if it's a single family, or to rent if it's a multi-family rental. Housing tax credit. This is a dollar for dollar tax credit for affordable housing investment. And we are here there are 2 different tax credits. We are talking, there is a 4% tax credit that fund 30% of the construction cost, and the 9% tax credit that will fund 70% of the construction cost. The 9% is super competitive. You have to go, as a developer or contractor, you have to go through an RFP process based on a qualified allocation plan. We call it QAP. I actually managed the tax credit program when I was working for the city of St. Paul. And I put together last year the QAP, which is basically defines the rules. What are the requirements that are needed for you to apply? For example, the number of units that are affordable for in the building. For example, if you have Section 8, how many units should be Section 8? The higher, the better. So, and repeat, we don't have a city like St. Paul doesn't have enough tax credit. It's very limited. Each year, IRS allocate a certain number of tax credits to the city of St. Paul. I think I don't remember, but it's about maybe $10 per inhabitant. But anyway, for a total, we had less than $1 million last year. And so once you can go, the staff would pick the best, what is very competitive, and there's a point, it's based on points, and then the best will win the tax credit for that year. So there are also other targeted programs that I would like to discuss here. Those programs are usually like for example, in 2008, there was coming out of the Great Recession, the federal government created this NSP program, which is a neighborhood stabilization program. And the goal was to stabilize neighborhoods impacted by the foreclosure crisis in 2008. The restriction was 120% AMI, so above the average AMI. So so as a project manager working for a developer, you also have to look for bills passed by Congress, because, for example, now we have the pandemic and Congress focuses on helping renters. If you own your development, for example, let's say a rental development, your tenants have issues, some difficulties paying their rent, they can get help through these various acts passed by Congress in the past year, like maybe 2 or 3 now. So that they can be able to afford their rents. The other big important piece is the unrestricted, what we call unrestricted funds. These are funding sources provided by the local government. They do not have any other restrictions than those attached to the program as described by the local government. One example, last year, 4 or 5 years ago, I worked on the City of Temple Rental Rehab Loan Program. In the process of writing the policies and guidelines attached to the program, there was a discussion about what type of funding the city should be using. So my argument was that the city should be using unrestricted funds, meaning they are not coming from the federal or even the state government. The city council can define their own rules. And my argument was that this would give us more flexibility in deciding the parameters and the requirements and not having to report back to the federal government. Also, contractors, especially small ones, do not necessarily want to deal with the paperwork and the reporting attached to federal funding sources. And the city also did not have the resources to monitor the requirements associated with federal funding. The city has a department that monitors compliance, all the compliance issues, but it's easier to deal with one contractor working on a multifamily project than 50 or more different contractors, each one working on a 1 to 7 unit project. The main question would be, why do you want, given all these restrictions, why do you want to ask for government subsidies for your project? Well, the short answer is because it's cheap. You have the terms, usually 30 to 40 years, a 30 to 40 year term, and the rate, I haven't done a project with more than 2% interest, generally. Usually it's either 0 or 1 or 2, depending on the location. And most of the time, principal and interest are deferred. So it's on you as a project manager to weigh the pros and cons of the different sources. Do you want to build a market rate residential building in Frogtown with the risk to having 20 or 30% vacancy? Or is it better to seek government subsidies so that rents can be lower?
Okay.
I think I'm going to stop there now. If you have any questions, I will be happy to answer. This should be really a discussion between us. I'm happy to listen to you guys and answer any questions.
I have a question, Jules. On the tax credits, aren't those normally packaged and sold to investors
Yes.
externally?
Yes, that's correct. Basically, when the city, the local government gives you tax credit, then you give that to an investor. Well, the developer has a contract with already with an investor, like can be like a bank, like US Bank or Wells Fargo. So they will sell those tax credit to US Bank or Wells Fargo or any other investor.
Yep, and those come right off of the tax bill. It's not a
and
like
usually I know right now the pricing is about for $1, the investor will pay maybe 95 cents, which is a good price. Sometimes the developer, the investor will pay even more than $1 because when the market's really good, when the market's bad, the investor will pay maybe 60 cents for $1 or 75 cents. Right now, the market's fairly good. We are around 90, between 90 and $1 for $1. But sometimes the market is so hot that the investors are competing for this tax credit and they will pay even above $1. You may ask, are they losing money? Not necessarily, because they want to avoid paying taxes. You probably heard of the tax rate for big corporation, which is, at the time, it was a few years ago, I think it was 36%. Then basically they can avoid paying taxes by investing in local communities that way. But when the tax rate is lower, like I think right now it's 21%, then there is really no incentive for them to invest in that kind of community development business.
Yeah.
So then on that same point, Jules,
yeah,
are there some like guidelines or requirements for a lot of those larger companies on how much they should be reinvesting in their communities too?
Yeah, there's a the Community Reinvestment Act, or CRA, that Congress passed many years ago. Yeah, there is a certain amount of money that they are required to invest in local communities. So that's why at some point they are ready to compete to get those tax credit.
Okay.
That's a good question.
They have to meet the benchmark, is what you're saying.
Exactly.
Okay. A bidding war.
Yeah.
Okay.
Hey, Jules. So it's my understanding that the QAP, doesn't it change every year? So could you summarize like the updates for this most recent year to the requirements?
Yeah, the one, and you can find them online for each, well, actually in Minnesota, we have, I think, 3 or 4 entities that are allowed to have their own QAP that are issuers, basically they are issuers. There's the state through Minnesota Housing, we have the city of St. Paul, we have the city of Minneapolis, we have Dakota County, and I think we have Washington County as well. So the rest of the state is managed by Minnesota Housing, including those other big cities, Minneapolis and St. Paul. So developers have the options of either going to the city or going to the state directly. It's up to them. Sometimes they will come to talk to the city and see if their project is competitive. And we would discuss with them and say, okay, maybe you'll be more competitive with the state. Again, last year I put together the QAP, and you are right, it's something that is done every year. Well, so far it's been done every year. But this year, the state decided that they are going to do that every other year. So it's valid, the requirements are valid for 2 years from now on. And last year, the city and Minneapolis were discussing, because the city and Minneapolis actually have the same, they have what they call the joint financing board. They have the same QAP with some details inside that QAP. So they decide that what they're going to follow, they're going to wait for the state. If the state decides to go every 2 years, they put out a QAP every 2 years, then they will do the same. Yeah, so they are, you can find them online. It's a big document. If you, yeah, again, the requirements are based on the unit size and affordability, and also who is involved, what kind of amenities you bring to the community. For example, the building shouldn't only be like the units. If you have like a community room, for example, that people can use, if you have parking, and how many parking spots you have, for example. Yeah, there are many requirements, and yeah, I would probably send you online. You can just Google sample QAP, and yeah, as a matter of fact, I was searching for something, and I came across the other day. I came across a document, and it still has my name on it, because it was posted last year, so as a contact. But although I'm no longer with the city, but
yeah, thanks for sharing all that. That was all. I got a lot out of that, so thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Feel free to contact me if you have more questions.
So Jules, I don't know if anybody else has a question, but you probably are aware of the sort of the political tug of war that's going on in St. Paul with the project at University in Lexington, the big housing project that got turned down by the city council and the
Yeah.
planning commission, but got vetoed by the mayor. And so what are some of the challenges that those kinds of projects bring
Yeah.
to your objectives? You know, it's
Yeah. Well, that's a very good question. And you need to understand that when you are a developer or a contractor and you go to the field, you have to deal with the community. And usually the community, like in St. Paul, they want affordable housing. They don't want market rate, because market rate, they think, bring gentrification. Basically, people who have more means, more incomes will come in the neighborhood, will come and live in the neighborhood, and that would push away people, the residents who've been living there forever and who don't have the means to afford that kind of high rents. So I think the issue here is to strike the balance between affordable housing and market rates, especially in an area like along the Greenway, which is really gentrifying. I mean, for many years now, there've been a lot of developments. I worked on a couple of developments there. One of them was affordable. The other one was market rate, but it went through the city because they obtained funding through the state Met Council. I think it was a cleanup grant. So the requirement for this type of grant is that the developer has to apply through the city. So when you have this kind of a lot of these type of projects, then you have issues with the community. I know that the community is strongly opposed to the development you are talking about. I saw on Facebook some very nasty comments from people from the community. That always happen, right? Yeah, the council members listen to their base, right? But the mayor, for some reasons, gave the go ahead. That's yeah, when you work for a local government, you have to deal with this type of politics.
yeah. Well, it's unusual. It's very rare for the mayor to go above the council vote.
Yeah.
And it's even questionable as to whether it was legal or not. But
well, it's rare for St. Paul, for city council to go against the mayor. I will put it that way, because actually staff in St. Paul works for the mayor, whereas in Minneapolis, there's this dual system where they work for city council and the mayor. But in St. Paul, we have a strong government, or they have a strong government. So everything that goes before the city council or the HRA board, that means it's approved by the mayor. And it's very rare for city council to go against the mayor.
Okay.
Yeah.
Or
I have a question in the chat for you, Jules. Jennifer asks, with the new 2020 requirement, the inclusionary zoning, about 8% affordable housing recs in Minneapolis, are you anticipating increased funding options with the higher demand?
Well, working for the state, I know that the governor has a proposal for 100,000. He has 100 million. He has a bonding bill for $100 million. The good surprise is that the House increased that to $150 million, which is good. The bad news is that the Senate has zero. So it's right now we really don't know what would happen. We hope they would strike a balance somewhere, but we don't know. Yeah, to answer the question, we listen. We obviously work for the governor. We support his proposal. If the House thinks $150 million is better, that's even better. But the Senate said is zero, basically. So we are waiting to see what would happen.
Jules, you talked about politics, but I would wonder if you could speak to the role that like racism and classism has in affordable housing.
Yeah.
Because I know that that's, you know, kind of a huge part of it.
Yeah, that's a huge part of it. And it's actually a huge cost that you can either take housing policy. We're talking about Ed Gates. I think he's the one giving that course at Humphrey School. Right now, people are aware. I think communities are making a lot of efforts to make sure that these issues are addressed because they are structural issues. If you look at the history, you see that these are meant by the federal, these were meant by the federal government to exclude the BIPOC community from housing. So communities are trying to address these issues. When I work for the city of St. Paul, for example, when I put together the rental rehab program, the goal was also to increase access for small landlords to increase access to funding as 0% interest, you know, to have these the minority community have access to financing, cheap financing, so that they can fix their rental investment or even their house. I have to admit that we were not very successful, but we were, last August, we amended the guidelines so that to make them just easier. I mean, less paperwork and fewer requirements. When it comes to, for example, the tax credit program, and we're talking about the QAP. Last year, we put some requirements so that when you get tax credit to build a building, a residential, multifamily residential building, the people living in the building should reflect the community in the area. So you have to provide a bunch of documents, like a market study of the area that shows the demographics. And you have to show that you will reach out to those demographics. And we have a third party that does the monitoring each year for 15 years to make sure that those requirements are implemented. Unfortunately, there was some kind of breaks with the previous administration that removed all the, I would say, progressive laws that were previously put in place, like the Fair Market, forgot how it was called, the Fair Market Act, that allowed community that wanted, or asked for communities that wanted government funding to build affordable housing, because one of the issues here in the Twin Cities is that you will have plenty of affordable housing units in Minneapolis and St. Paul, but suburbs are still resistant to build those, or you have very few of them. So you probably, well, I don't want to get into politics, but you probably heard about slogans like "We'll keep you safe." Basically, that meant you wouldn't have any affordable housing that would attract those people in your community.
Yeah.
So if I could ask a question that kind of strays away from the community process.
Yeah.
I've been reading a lot more about home loans and especially the 204. And I was hoping you could kind of expand on that a little bit, because I know just very brief cliff notes on it.
Did you say the 204?
Yes, sir.
And it's related to home?
Yes, sir.
Well, I'm not familiar with that type of program. I know that HUD has plenty of programs, but that specific 204, I'm sorry, I'm not familiar with it. But I can talk about home in general.
All right.
Yeah, I know that home, it's a program to provide home ownership to low income. I worked with the home program for a couple of developments. One of them was a 9-unit single family development in West St. Paul. And they have plenty of requirements. And it's a very difficult program to work with for developers and contractors, because of the requirements and the monitoring going with those requirements. A lot of paperwork involved, and well, people just don't like to work with that type of program. And yeah, unfortunately, when a developer or a contractor come to us for funding, we offer them what we have, because when the federal government gives money to a local, they have a certain, maybe a year or 18 months to spend it or to commit it. So basically they have to commit those funding, they have 18 months, and then maybe 3 years to spend it. Otherwise it goes back to the allocation goes back to the federal government. Yeah.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, sure.
I've heard from a number of my developer clients over the years that if you can survive the paperwork, it's worth it. That if you basically on any given project can put together 3 or 4 different federal grant programs or state grant programs or local grant programs, and you can satisfy all the paperwork requirements. It takes a little longer to get to closing, but in the end, it's worth it over the long run.
Exactly.
But you really have to know how to fill out the paperwork.
Yeah, you need to know how to fill out the paperwork, and you need to have the capacity, because most of the developers don't have most developers don't have that capacity to have someone who's dedicated to doing this, and it's it can be it's very time consuming. You need to meet with city staff. You need to meet with compliance staff. It's, yeah, if you can survive that, it's worth it. Because actually, when we say affordable, you may think that rents are low, but actually, if you look at real actual rents in some neighborhoods, they are lower than the restrictions, the thresholds, basically.
Wow.
So if you don't want to use government funding, you go to private, you pay high interest. Your rents will actually be lower than, lower than what the government requires.
Cool.
Well, Jules, I guess one more question for you, if we got you still. I guess, where would you see in terms of like recent developments and I guess city encouragement as to where to start to kind of like implement more low-income housing?
The thing is funding. I think it's also a question of are local politicians willing to pay for that? I think they have the means to do that. And that's my personal opinion. I think they have the means to do that. It's now a question of are they willing to do it? It's also the industry. I know you guys probably took a class in econ class. You probably know about scarcity, right? If you give housing to everyone, then So there is this, I think it's just a design system to create scarcity so that housing doesn't lose its value, because housing is very important in our economy. It's not a social tool, although it should be. So it's still an economic tool that is used for people to build wealth. And that's the opinion of someone who works in housing policies, but it's not.
Yeah.
Jules, can I share your email in the chat? So if anybody wants to follow up with you or connect with you on LinkedIn, that they can
Sure.
Do that. Awesome.
Sure. Yeah.
And we do. Go ahead, Peter.
I would just one quick question here, but it's completely off the topic, but it's been 10 years since you graduated from the program. So did you ever think you would be here? What were some of the interesting challenges you had or surprises you had, or what did you find about your experience here at the U that now has transformed you into this role? So
yeah, no, Peter, that's a good question. I still remember the day that Megan hired me to be in the program, basically, because I just walked into the office. I made an appointment. I went to hear about what type of training or education I get from the U. And she talked about this program. I said, well, I already have a degree in civil engineering, and this would be very kind of I feel like they were linked somehow. And that's why when I was in the program, I took a lot of classes in the civil engineering program, but I also knew that I wanted to go to grad school. So I had the option at the end either to continue in the civil engineering program, and I actually talked to Ann Johnson, and she was very supportive of that. So, or go to the Humphrey School. But I thought that if I go to Humphrey, then I can have an impact in housing policies instead of only being someone who applies stuff that other people decide. That's how I decided to go to the Humphrey School, because I got the admission for both schools. I was going to do structural engineering or policy. So I picked the policy.
opposite spectrums right there.
Yeah.
Okay, well.
But yeah, go ahead.
Will you maybe share a little bit more about your experience at the Humphrey School and why you decided to do a master's program, in case that's something? Most of these students are probably ready to be done and graduate, but I know when I left, I was so glad to be done, and then I had an itching to come back, and I ended up back in school about a year and a half after I graduated undergrad. So maybe share a little bit about your experience and why you decided to go that route.
Yeah, and just to go back to Peter's question, I gotta say that when I was in the program, Peter asked a question one day: what do you want to do later? And most students were, I want to be a project manager. And he said that I would like you to think farther than a project manager, being a project manager. So I think that was really eye-opening. And also taking these classes, I felt like they were very broad. It was very helpful to me, not really focused on the trade or construction management. They were really wide. They gave me the sense of like everything is linked. So that's basically how I decided, well, I gotta go to grad school to expand my knowledge. Yeah, and at the Humphrey School, actually they are in the urban and regional planning program. They have three or four parts. They have community development and affordable housing. They have land use planning, and most students would do land use planning. And also, I think they also have like economic development. So I wanted to do community development, affordable housing. I went to financing. Yeah, and I think it was a very good program. I really appreciated the dedication of staff. I always say that even when I was in the CMGT program, I think the staff was really dedicated to the students, to each student. As long as you approach them and you talk about your issue, they were really willing to help you. And it was the same with the Humphrey School and talking with professors, and always a pleasure to be invited every, I think, 3 years or 4 years to talk about the strategic planning for the next 3 years for the program, for the planning school. It's, the only thing is that you may know that I came from a very warm climate and it was very cold, and sometimes we had to take classes at 6 o'clock, night classes, and it was during the winter. It was tough,
So,
but it was worth it.
yeah. So you were from Cameroon, was that right?
From Cameroon, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, you remember.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, this is really good. So,
Yeah.
anybody-
Any final questions?
I'll throw one more in if that's all right.
Go for it.
So I guess, Jules, what are you seeing, or what would you suggest for a multifamily, like low-income housing developer to pursue for typical like financing?
If you can get unrestricted local government money, that's the best. But if you cannot, CDBG would be good. It has fewer restrictions and little bit less monitoring than home. Home funding is a nightmare, I tell you, for everyone, even for city staff. Because the federal government has so many restrictions when it comes to home. There's usually a staff or two that are dedicated to work on home. CDBG, any staff at the city working in any project manager working for the city can do that easily. But home, yeah. And also I would, if you want to work on financing, I would advise that maybe you take, and usually it's paid by your employer. There is a financing class that lasts, I think they have like 5 sessions. Each session lasts a few days to 1 week, and then after 5 sessions, over the course of maybe 9 months, you get certified, you get finance certified, which is really good if you want to work in that area. Most employers require that. If you don't have it, they will pay for you. If they hire you, they will pay for you to attend those classes. Maybe every 3-4 years, they come to the Twin Cities, invited by Minnesota Housing, and people in the Midwest come to attend those classes. Sometimes they will pay for you to travel to go attend those classes. So I would advise taking those classes, that certification.
What were those called?
I don't remember yet, but I can send you the name. I would send that to Courtney, and yeah.
Yeah, and I put Jules's LinkedIn and email in there too, so feel free to connect with him that way. In the chat, I put it in there.
Well, you know what, Jules? It's really nice to know that 10 years ago you graduated and you're still doing homework.
Well,
sorry,
he's always got to get a dad joke in. He's always got to do that. So
Yeah, he hasn't changed.
It's not. I mean, Megan can probably vouch for that the best. Well, Jules, on behalf of CCAPS and the Construction Facilities Management Program, thank you. And we love seeing what our alumni are doing. And to all of you students who are graduating, good luck. Yay. I hope to
Yeah.
see you at commencement. You might not be able to see me as much because I'll have a mask on, and I don't think we can be within 6 feet of you, but we'll figure it out, and hope to see you all in a couple weeks. And
Well, thank you for inviting me. It was really nice to see all of you and hear from students. Though some of you are seniors, good luck. Feel free to reach out. Yeah, discuss. Unfortunately, nowadays, we cannot meet for coffee.
soon, hopefully.
Yeah, but I think hopefully in the coming months or years, they should be able to go back to normal. Thank you very much. It was an honor to be with you.
All right.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Have a good night.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here.
Bye.
Thanks again, Jules.